By the time the first warning reached Relay Convoy 9, 3 ships were already dead. Not destroyed in battle, not torn apart by pirates, not swallowed by any storm the charts could name. One moment they had been crossing the outer edge of the Ashvale exclusion, dragging broken hulls and mineral carcasses towards civilized space, and the next their signatures had simply vanished from every screen as if reality itself had changed its mind about letting them exist. The surviving crews could still see the stars. They could still hear their own breathing. But in the convoy network, 3 ships had become empty coordinates, ghost positions moving through silence with no mass, no heat, no trace of life. Then the message arrived. Leora Sen had spent 6 years as a relay officer, and in all that time she had learned that fear usually came with noise. It came with shouting on command decks, with alarms bleeding through metal corridors, with captains barking orders they only half understood. This fear came quietly. It slid across her console as a single transmission on a legal band so old the translation lattice almost refused to touch it. The waveform was stable. The signature was authentic. The authority stamp embedded inside it carried a jurisdiction older than the Concord itself. And when the decoded line appeared on her display, every sound in the relay chamber seemed to fall away. We dispute the official history of our extinction. No one spoke for a full 3 seconds, which on a working convoy felt unnatural enough to be a malfunction. Captain Etran leaned over her shoulder first, his scaled hands gripping the edge of her station so hard the alloy creaked. He asked what species code had generated it, already sounding as if he feared the answer, and Leora ran the parse again because her mouth had gone dry. The system returned the same result twice, then flagged the translation archive with a cemetery mark reserved for civilizations that no longer existed. Human. Extinct designation. Finalized 18,000 years ago. Etran stepped back as if the screen had become physically dangerous, while half the bridge stared at the word and the other half stared at him, waiting to see whether terror was now official policy. Then the exclusion zone woke up. Across the dead system ahead, dormant satellites ignited in perfect silence, their black shells peeling open like mechanical flowers around the corpse of an ancient sun. Not defense platforms, Leora realized at first glance, because their weapons did not point outward. They pointed inward, forming a cage around something hidden near the star's dim corona. The convoy sensors strained, glitched, recalibrated, and finally assembled a shape so wrong that several displays froze trying to render it. It was vast, angular, and impossibly still, less like a ship than a sealed monument unfolding after an age of patience. Layer by layer, dark panels separated from its surface and turned toward open space, as if the thing were not arriving at all but unsealing itself for witnesses it had expected. A second transmission burst through every frequency before anyone could order retreat. This one was stronger, colder, and meant for the entire system. The same ancient legal code rode beneath it, but now another line followed, and this one hit harder than any threat. Record custodians present. Public hearing requested. Suppression attempt already logged. Leora felt the blood drain from her face. Someone, somewhere, had expected them to lie. That was when the convoy received a priority command from the inner ministries, stamped less than 20 seconds after the human signal had appeared, ordering all crews to classify the event as a sensor hallucination and cut civilian relay immediately. The timing should have been impossible. The order should not have existed yet. But it was there, waiting, as though the government had prepared for this exact sentence long before anyone in the convoy had heard it. Around the bridge, panic finally found its voice. Behind the black satellites, the hidden structure continued to open. And from somewhere inside that sealed darkness, something ancient, human, and utterly unafraid was preparing to speak again. The order to classify the event as a hallucination should have ended the matter. In the Concord, truth moved downward, never upward. If the inner ministries declared that something had not happened, then every office below them existed to make reality obey. Records were amended, witness logs were harmonized, sensor trails were purified, and within a few cycles the lie acquired the polished weight of official memory. Leora had seen it done after mining disasters, border massacres, even famine outbreaks on tribute worlds the Council preferred to call temporary supply distortions. But this was different, and everyone on Relay Convoy 9 knew it. Hallucinations did not authenticate themselves with extinct legal seals. Hallucinations did not trigger quarantine satellites older than the state. Hallucinations did not arrive with suppression orders already drafted, signed, and waiting before the message had even finished crossing the bridge. Captain Etran still gave the command, because men like him had survived long careers by obeying first and thinking later. Civilian relay was cut. Outerband transmitters were burned clean. The convoy's public logs were locked behind Ministry cipher. Yet the silence that followed was worse than the broadcast. The sealed structure near the dead star continued opening in measured segments, each movement so slow and deliberate it felt ceremonial. No weapons discharge followed. No attack formation emerged. It simply revealed more of itself, and the more it revealed, the less it resembled any vessel Leora had ever studied. Its surfaces were not armored like warship plating or curved like modern transit hulls. They were layered in terraces, ridges, and geometric recesses engraved with lines too fine for utility, too precise for ornament, as if the entire thing had been built by a civilization that believed even survival should be beautiful. The bridge crew kept pretending to work. No one wanted to be the first to say aloud what the structure was doing to them. It was not just fear. Fear could be mastered. This was the far more dangerous sensation of meaning. They were looking at something that had crossed 18,000 years of silence and emerged not as debris, not as a ruin, but as an argument. Leora tried to keep her hand steady as she ran another deep parse on the extinct language key. She expected failure. The Concord maintained dead-tongue libraries mostly for ceremonial use, the way empires keep bones in glass cases and call it reverence. Instead, the archive opened deeper than she had ever seen it go. A warning banner flashed across her private screen, informing her that the data she was attempting to access had restricted continuity relevance and would be monitored for cognitive destabilization. That alone would have made most officers stop. Leora leaned closer. The extinct species designation returned again. Human. Cultural classification disputed. Extinction status contested multiple times in pre-Concord eras, all appeals sealed. Seal authority, unavailable. Appeal witnesses, unavailable. Termination authority, redacted. She stared at the word redacted longer than she meant to. Species extinction records were never redacted. They were final, public, foundational. Whole regions of law depended on them. Trade zones, inheritance claims, salvage rights, territorial doctrine, educational canon, memorial practice, everything was built on the assumption that the dead stayed categorized. Yet here, at the root of humanity's disappearance, the record itself had been mutilated. Her console chimed again, but this time it was not the Ministry's. An encrypted channel had slipped through the convoy lockout using an obsolete maintenance protocol no one under the age of 2 centuries should have known how to use. Leora almost killed it on reflex. Instead, she opened the line and found a woman's face rendered in low-resolution static, sharp-eyed, dark-skinned, and visibly furious. She did not introduce herself. She did not ask permission. She simply said, "If you are the relay officer who heard the legal claim, listen carefully. Do not let them classify this. Once they bury it, they will start deleting witnesses." Leora should have reported the intrusion at once, but the woman continued before fear could turn into obedience. She said her name was Tavin Real. She called herself a memory courier, which in ministry language meant criminal archivist, data thief, trafficker in unauthorized history. She claimed there had been rumors for years about sealed extinction files inside the oldest Concord vaults, but no proof, never proof, until the human transmission hit a public relay node. She had already intercepted fragments before the convoy shutdown took effect. More disturbing than her certainty was her tone. She did not sound surprised that a dead species had spoken. She sounded like someone hearing the first crack in a wall she had long known was hollow. Leora demanded to know how she had reached a locked military convoy. Tavin ignored the question. Instead, she pushed a packet through the line, small enough to evade autoscanners, and vanished before bridge security traced the breach. For 2 full breaths, Leora did nothing. Then she opened the file and felt her stomach tighten. It was a registry page. Old, heavily damaged, partially reconstructed. At the top sat a civic insignia unlike any modern seal, circular and elegant, stamped with the same extinct legal architecture as the transmission. Beneath it was a list of names, dates, education assignments, immunization schedules, and family cluster placements. It looked almost harmless until her eyes reached the notation appended to every entry. Population disposition, archival deletion pending. The names belonged to children. The bridge suddenly felt too small to breathe in. Leora killed the image before anyone nearby could see it, but it was already inside her now, lodged behind the ribs like shrapnel. Extinction had always sounded abstract in academy doctrine. Civilizational collapse. Resource failure. Migration loss. Statistical vanishing. Not children classified for deletion by bureaucratic category. Not paperwork so calm it made the crime look routine. Captain Etran called her name sharply, snapping her back to the bridge. A ministry envoy vessel had entered the system without normal approach signature, sleek and white as ceremonial bone, accompanied by 2 black escorts with transponders masked. That was not a fact-finding team. That was a burial team. Orders followed at once. Relay Officer Leorason was to surrender all raw signal captures for continuity review and submit to direct cognitive audit. She knew exactly what that meant. Memory extraction. Loyalty reconstruction if necessary. The state was not merely interested in controlling the event, it was interested in controlling who had seen it first. Ahead of them, the ancient structure completed another stage of opening. This time light appeared within it, not bright, but deep, as though some preserved dawn had been waiting behind metal for 18,000 years. New symbols moved across Leora's board, translating themselves faster now that the system recognized a legal respondent in range. She read the next line in silence, and for the first time since the signal arrived, awe pushed fear aside. The thing near the dead star was not a ship asking rescue. It was a witness vault initiating formal proceedings. And somewhere inside that impossible human architecture, something had been waiting almost 20 millennia not to beg for survival, not to demand revenge, but to force the galaxy to remember what it had done. The ministry envoy boarded under the language of law and the posture of execution. No alarms sounded when its docking clamps sealed against Relay Convoy 9, yet everyone on the bridge felt the atmosphere change as if a predator had entered the air itself. The envoy's hatch opened onto 6 continuity wardens in polished white armor, their faces hidden behind smooth reflective masks, and behind them came a single unarmored official in a dark silver coat whose insignia bore no branch marking at all. That absence meant more than rank. It meant exemption. It meant he answered to offices ordinary officers never saw. He stepped onto the bridge with calm, almost courteous precision, introduced himself as Executor Malrek of Historical Stability, and requested the surrender of all primary records related to the anomaly. Requested, Leora noticed, while his wardens had already begun disconnecting consoles. Captain Etran obeyed with embarrassing speed. He rose from command, recited the convoy's compliance oath, and ordered all personnel to release their raw feeds into sealed continuity review. The bridge moved at once, half from training and half from fear, but Leora's hands stayed motionless. Above her board, she knew the moment she handed over the unfiltered transmission stack, the event would vanish into the same invisible furnace that had swallowed every inconvenient truth before it. Malrek saw her hesitation immediately. He did not threaten her. That would have been easier to resist. Instead he smiled with quiet approval, as if she were an intelligent child struggling with a simple lesson, and told her that history was not a collection of facts. History, he said, was a civilizational immune system, and immune systems sometimes had to isolate dangerous contamination before the body mistook poison for revelation. The bridge might have accepted that language if the dead star had remained silent. Instead the witness vault moved again. A tremor ran through every screen as the black satellites pivoted inward and projected a lattice of thin gold lines across the void, forming a geometry so vast it could only be perceived in fragments. The vault at the center answered with light, not a beam, not a weapon, but an intricate pulse that spread through the lattice like thought passing through a nervous system. Sensors tried to label it communications traffic and failed. tried to label it power harmonics and failed again. Then ancient legal strings began replicating across every restricted channel in the convoy, bypassing ministry locks as if modern encryption were ceremonial decoration. New text flooded Leora's display in extinct human script before resolving into Concord Standard. Recognized custodians present. Hearing chamber preparing. False classification noted. Destruction probability elevated. Witness protocol advancing. Malrek's expression did not change, but the skin around his eyes tightened. For the first time since stepping onto the bridge, he stopped performing calm and became something far more dangerous. A man forced to improvise. He ordered the fleet grid sealed, local drives charged, and all civilian minds on board flagged for post-event audit. Then he walked to Leora's station and placed one gloved hand beside her console, close enough for her to smell sterile metal and the faint medicinal scent of memory extraction gel. In a softer voice, for her alone, he told her that the structure ahead was not a relic of innocence. It was an engineered destabilization engine created by a species that had learned too quickly and refused proper oversight. Humanity, he said, had not died because it was weak. Humanity had died because it believed truth gave it the right to reorganize power. The sentence should have chilled her. Instead, it did something worse. It made humanity sound dangerous in exactly the way tyrants describe honest people. Before she could answer, the private maintenance channel flashed again. Tavin Real had returned, piggybacking now on the vault's expanding signal architecture. Her face appeared in broken bands of static, sharper this time, and behind her Leora glimpsed motion, crowded shelves, portable drives, the cramped metallic den of someone who lived inside stolen memory. Tavin had no patience left for caution. She said the ministries were already issuing silent takedown warrants across archive hubs and academic worlds. 3 researchers had disappeared within the last 11 minutes for attempting extinct language correlation. An education net on Selvar Prime had gone dark after students began sharing fragments of the first claim. This is not containment, she said. This is pre-burial. They knew exactly what would speak from that system, and they built the response before it woke. Leora fed the new information into the hidden partition she had carved beneath her console, a dangerous act made more dangerous by how natural it now felt. She asked Tavin the question that had been burning behind every other fear. If the Concord had spent millennia suppressing this, why had the vault waited until now? Tavin hesitated, and for a moment the criminal's certainty cracked into something like awe. Then she said she had found references in outlawed fragments to an old human doctrine called deferred witness. Not revenge after atrocity. Not survival at any cost. Witness. The obligation to preserve undeniable testimony until power grew unstable enough that truth could no longer be smothered in one clean motion. Whatever that thing is, Tavin whispered, glancing somewhere off-screen as if she feared being overheard by history itself, it didn't wake because it survived. It woke because the galaxy is finally weak enough to hear it. The words landed harder than any threat on the bridge. If they were true, then humanity had not merely endured. Humanity had calculated time on a civilizational scale, buried its voice under eras of empire, and chosen this exact moment to rise, not with a fleet, but with evidence. That thought was still expanding inside Leora when the vault finally addressed a living mind directly. Every display on the bridge went black except hers. The dead screen filled slowly with a horizon she did not recognize, bronze clouds over a pale ocean, wind moving through towering grass under a sky streaked with 2 moons. The image was too detailed to be a simulation and too intimate to be a tactical projection. It felt like memory presented with unbearable restraint. A voice followed, human and calm, neither male nor female, old without sounding weak. Licensed custodian, it said, and Leora understood with sudden certainty that the vault was not speaking to the ship. It was speaking to her role, to the function she served in a system that had forgotten why such roles were ever created. You are in proximity to an unclosed extinction dispute. By the first civic accords of interspecies record, a custodian may hear testimony before obedience is demanded. Will you receive witness? Her pulse thundered. Around her, the bridge crew shouted as their systems tried to recover. Malrek barked orders. Wardens rushed toward her station. None of it seemed fully real beside the impossible calm of that human voice. To receive witness was not passive. It was procedural acceptance. It would bind her, legally if the old code still held, morally even if they did not. It would turn hesitation into choice. Malrek reached her first. His hand clamped around her wrist with surgical force. Gone was the courteous mask, gone the academic language. In its place stood naked state terror. He told her that if she accepted, she would trigger an archive claim older than the Concord and invalidate standing continuity doctrine across 1,000 jurisdictions. Trade law would fracture. Sovereignty challenges would ignite. Educational canons would collapse. Species long classified as vanished might reopen inheritance claims from beyond recorded time. "Do you understand?" he said, voice low and shaking with restrained fury. "What happens if dead civilizations regain standing?" She thought. "The living have to answer them." The wardens tore open the panel beside her station, reaching for the core feed. Somewhere deep in the convoy, power rerouted toward suppression arrays. On her black screen, the human horizon waited without pressure, without pleading, as if the vault had been built by people who believed free choice mattered most when the cost was highest. Tavin's hidden channel flared one last time in her ear. "Leora," she said, breathless now, "I found something else." Humanity wasn't the only species marked for deletion. That was the moment the bridge doors sealed, the lights cut to red, and the witness vault transmitted a second line only she could see. Primary testimony includes names of the still living. Or one suspended second, no one on the bridge moved. The words on Leora's darkened console seemed to bend the shape of the room around them. Primary testimony includes names of the still living. Not descendants. Not symbolic inheritors. Not sealed bloodlines sleeping in hidden vaults. Still living. The implication struck with such force that even panic had to make room for it. Somewhere inside the architecture of this witness vault, humanity was claiming not only that the dead had been erased, but that the crime had never truly ended. Someone connected to that extermination still existed within the living structure of the galaxy. Someone old enough, preserved enough, or institutionally continuous enough to be named. Malrek understood the danger of breath before anyone else did. Leora felt it in the sudden change in his grip. Until now he had been trying to control the event. Now he was trying to outrun it. He released her wrist only to slam his hand against the emergency command seal built into her console and authorize a total continuity seizure. Across the bridge, compartment locks crashed shut. Civilian channels were hard-muted. A suppression field rolled through the air in a high metallic hum that made Leora's teeth ache. The wardens moved with brutal efficiency, not toward the witness vault feed anymore, but toward the crew themselves. Every person who had seen too much was becoming part of the contamination. Captain Etran protested once, weakly, invoking convoy charter and requesting explanation. Malrek did not even turn to face him. He simply informed the captain that all local command authority had been suspended under extinction-class secrecy. Two wardens forced Etran to his knees before the sentence was fully out of Malrek's mouth. The bridge fell silent again, but this time it was not awe that caused it. It was recognition. Whatever lay inside the human vault had frightened the state enough to strip lawful command in open sight. Leora should have been terrified for herself, yet what rose first inside her was fury. The state had just shown its true face, not in some buried archive or ancient allegation, but here, now, under working lights and trembling red alert. She looked down at her console where the human horizon still waited, patient and impossibly calm, and for the first time she felt something deeper than curiosity about the species behind the signal. She felt alignment. Whoever they had been, they had understood this pattern so well they had built a machine to survive it. Malrek leaned close and lowered his voice, not because he wished to spare her, but because truth was something he could only say quietly. He told her the witness vault was manipulating procedural instincts in order to coerce legal recognition. He told her that hearing testimony was not the same as validating it. He told her old systems often carried dangerous authority long after wiser civilizations learned to restrain them. Yet beneath the polished reasoning, Leora heard the fracture. He was not arguing against falsehood. He was arguing against exposure. There was no confidence in his words, only urgency. No moral certainty, only a man trying desperately to keep one door from opening before another locked behind him. Then the bridge speakers came alive with a voice no one had authorized. It was not the same measured human tone that had addressed Leora privately. This voice belonged to the vault itself, deeper and resonant in a way that made the deck plating seem to carry it rather than the comm system. It filled the bridge without shouting and spoke with the solemn force of a law older than empire. Continuity seizure acknowledged, it said. Suppression attempt matches preserved doctrine. Escalation conditions satisfied. Secondary witness channels opening. The black satellites around the dead star changed shape. Until that moment, they had formed a cage around the vault, a geometry of containment. Now they unfolded again, rotating outward in slow, exact increments until they faced not the structure at their center, but the ships surrounding it. Golden lines flashed between them, and a vast lattice spread across the system like a net of light cast through vacuum. Every vessel in range lit up with signal interference alarms. The envoy's escorts lost formation first. Their drives flickered, then dimmed, as if something had reached into their navigation cores and asked them to remember a different set of laws. Relay Convoy 9 held together only because the vault, for reasons Leora did not yet understand, was protecting it. Tavin's channel burst back into Leora's earpiece beneath the noise. This time the memory courier sounded as if she were running. Metal rang behind her. Voices shouted in the distance. She said black site archives across 3 sectors had begun dumping partial records into dead storage, automatic purge behavior triggered by the same legal phrases the vault was broadcasting. That should have buried everything deeper. Instead, the panic had created seams. Fragment after fragment was surfacing where frightened systems failed to delete cleanly. Species disposition charts. Population transfer orders. Cultural nullification protocols. And threaded through all of it one repeated phrase, continuity risk if witness class survives. Leora's skin went cold. Witness class, she whispered. Yes, Tavin said. Not combatants. Not rivals. Witnesses. They targeted the people who could prove what the old powers were doing to everyone else. That revelation changed the shape of the entire crime. Humanity had not simply risen too fast or threatened the balance through strength. Humanity had become dangerous because it could make reality harder to edit. Not just for itself, but for every species living under imperial narrative control. That was why the violence had felt disproportionate. The extermination was not a conquest. It was an archival execution. On the bridge, Malrek had begun issuing fleet-wide orders through secure channels, but even his voice was less steady now. He called for hard jam saturation, local fire readiness, and preparation for solar sterilization authorization if the vault breached system quarantine. The phrase hit Leora like a physical blow. Solar sterilization. Not boarding. Not seizure. Not recovery. They were willing to burn the entire star system rather than let human testimony leave it intact. Around her, members of the convoy crew heard the order and understood it too. Faces shifted from confusion to horror. Whatever official doctrine they had once trusted no longer mattered. No government sterilized a dead system over a harmless relic. The human horizon on Leora's private screen changed at last. The wind over the grass faded, replaced by the interior of a long chamber lit with amber light. Human architecture rose in elegant vertical lines around a circular floor inset with symbols that echoed the legal code from the original transmission. At the center stood a figure rendered with such detail that Leora's breath caught. A human woman, older than Leora but not elderly, dark hair bound back, plain formal clothing marked by no military insignia at all. Her expression held sorrow, strength, and something almost unbearable in its restraint. She did not look like a conqueror waking from exile. She looked like a teacher walking into a room that had disappointed her. "My name is Mara Vale," the woman said. "Civic historian, Third Witness Assembly of Earth. If you are hearing me, then the systems designed to bury us are still active, and the living have inherited a lie they did not create." Her eyes, preserved across ages, met Leora's through the screen with unsettling intimacy. You are not the first custodian to hesitate. You may become the first to listen long enough. Behind Mara Veil, light flared across the chamber walls, and names began to appear in concentric rings, thousands of them at first, then tens of thousands, then more than Leora could track. Most carried extinction markers or sealed death stamps. Some were listed as vanished, unresolved, contested. And there, buried among the dead, a smaller column burned in hard white script. Active continuity lineage. Status, living. Leora's breath stopped. She recognized one of the names almost instantly, not because she had ever seen it before, but because every child in the Concord learned it by the age of 7. It belonged to one of the founding bloodlines of the modern ministries. Humanity, she realized in a rush of awe and dread, had not returned just to expose a murder. It had returned to prove that the empire itself had been built by the murderers. The bridge did not erupt into chaos after the name appeared. Chaos would have been easier. Chaos was honest. What spread instead was something colder and far more dangerous. Comprehension. Every officer on Relay Convoy 9 had been raised inside the same founding myths, taught that the Concord emerged from the ashes of ancient barbarism, that its first dynasties had delivered the galaxy from disorder, that history before unification was tragic but necessary. Now one luminous line on Leora's screen had cracked that entire edifice down the middle. A living continuity lineage tied one of those sacred founders directly to the extermination of humanity. The empire had not grown on top of a buried crime. It had grown out of it. Malrex saw the realization spreading and made his choice. He abandoned persuasion completely. Terminate the private feed, he ordered, voice flat with the authority of a man stepping past law into necessity. The wardens slammed signal knives into Leora's console, but the human architecture beneath the transmission adapted faster than any modern system should have been able to respond. Golden lines surged through the hardware. The blades overheated and burst into white sparks. One warden staggered back with a cry as the current jumped into his gauntlet and welded his fingers rigid. It was not an attack meant to kill. It was something more unnerving, precise refusal. Human systems, Leora realized, were not lashing out blindly. They were enforcing boundaries. Mara Veil continued speaking as if the panic around Leora were a weather event unworthy of interrupting testimony. If the lineages are still active, then the compact failed exactly as we feared, she said, and with a single gesture the chamber behind her expanded into impossible scale. Leora had thought she was seeing one witness hall. She was wrong. The image withdrew, revealing tier upon tier of circular galleries descending into warm amber light, each level lined with human figures preserved in stillness, not frozen like corpses but waiting with deliberate grace. Scholars, engineers, physicians, judges, teachers, artists, civilians in plain clothing. No thrones, no military banners, no worship of violence. It looked less like a bunker and more like the conscience of an entire species refusing to die quietly. For the first time since the signal had arrived, Leora understood what truly terrified the Concord. Humanity had not built a final weapon. Humanity had built a final memory. Mara's eyes held steady on Leora. You were taught extinction is an ending, she said. For us it became a legal condition. We accepted that we might lose our worlds. We refused to surrender the record. Another movement of her hand, and new images unfolded through the bridge air, human cities under twin dawns, archive towers carved into mountainsides, schools where children studied under inscriptions Leora could not read but somehow felt. Then the images changed. Fleets descending. Fire across oceans. Administrative orders stamped with calm signatures. Transit manifests rerouted into kill zones. The horror was not in the destruction alone. It was in the method. Humanity had not been crushed in some uncontrollable ancient war. Humanity had been processed. Tavin's voice broke in through the hidden channel, ragged with disbelief. She had received fragments of the same projection through the widening system lattice, and what she was seeing in the outlaw networks was worse. Public education archives on 7 worlds were already trying to autocorrect. Against the human testimony, But the correction engines were failing because they were built on the very continuity doctrines Mara was invoking. The old laws are under the newer laws, Tavin whispered. That's why they're panicking. The foundation is still there. Around her, Leora could hear more voices now, dozens perhaps, memory couriers and illicit archivists joining a stream that had suddenly become bigger than any one criminal network. The underworld of stolen truth had just found proof that truth itself had once been a recognized civic right. Malrek heard enough to understand that containment was slipping beyond the bridge. He drew a slender black device from inside his coat and pressed his thumb against its seal. Every screen on the ship flashed with an emergency priority so severe it bypassed rank, function, and sanity. Solar sterilization request filed. Pre-approval pending lineage confirmation. Leora stared at the wording, and the wording stared back. Pending lineage confirmation. The weapon was not being authorized despite the names. It was being authorized because of them. If the witness vault proved the founding bloodlines were implicated, the state preferred mass murder in the present to exposure in the past. But Mara Vale was already moving into the heart of her revelation, and nothing on the bridge could stop her now. You assume, she said softly, that this vault exists to restore human rule. The statement struck Leora with the force of a reversal so profound it silenced even her own fear. Of course that was what everyone had assumed. Return, revenge, reclamation, dominion. That was how empires thought. That was how states taught the dead to behave. Mara seemed almost saddened by the expectation. If power built on erasure can only be replaced by another power of the same kind, then extinction wins even when the victims survive. The chamber behind her lit from floor to ceiling. Leora saw then that the concentric galleries were not simply seats of testimony. They were stations of judgment. At the center of the hall, beneath Mara's feet, lay a circle inscribed with ancient civic code that translated itself across Leora's console in layers too dense to follow fully. Yet one line blazed clear enough to pierce everything else. Sovereignty may pass to the keepers of unedited witness. Mara let the line settle before she spoke again. We did not preserve this vault to place humanity above the galaxy, she said. We preserved it so no civilization would ever again be able to own history. New data cascaded outward, legal architectures older than the Concord, ratified once by species now scattered, forgotten, or misnamed in official textbooks. According to those laws, any polity proven to have systematically altered extinction records lost moral primacy under interspecies covenant. Authority did not revert to the strongest claimant. It transferred to any coalition willing to bind itself to unalterable public testimony. Leora felt the universe shift beneath her. This was not a threat of human conquest. It was worse for the Empire and far greater for everyone else. Humanity had left behind a mechanism by which truth itself could become the basis of power. Tavin gasped over the channel as her own systems finished translating the transfer clauses. Leora, she breathed, if this goes public, every edited species can reopen standing. Every sealed inheritance, every stolen world, every erased treaty. The whole Concord comes apart. She meant it as warning. To Leora, it sounded like the first honest possibility she had heard since childhood. Not collapse for its own sake, but reckoning. Not chaos, but the end of lies pretending to be order. Malrek finally lost all discipline. Enough, he snarled, and the word rang across the bridge like a fracture in polished stone. He turned from Leora and opened a secure command line with the escort destroyers surrounding the dead system. No more legal cover. No more procedural caution. He ordered assault alignment around the witness vault and demanded immediate execution of sterilization authority under existential continuity threat. Even Captain Etran, still pinned to the deck by wardens, looked up in stunned disbelief. The state was about to burn an entire system, a convoy, and its own officials to keep a courtroom from speaking. Yet Mara Vale did not flinch. If anything, her expression deepened into something fierce and unmistakably human. Sorrow transmuted into defiance. This is why we built the assembly, she said, and for the first time motion stirred in the tears behind her. The waiting figures of preserved humanity opened their eyes. Leora's breath caught. Hundreds at first, then thousands, faces rising into awareness across the amber galleries as if dawn itself were passing through them. Not soldiers waking for war. Witnesses waking for history. Teachers, mothers, jurists, engineers, old men with work-scarred hands, children standing beside elders, an entire civilization not armed for conquest but prepared, even after annihilation, to testify together. Then Mara delivered the final blow. "We did not come back to ask whether the galaxy remembers us," she said. "We came back to ask who among the living is willing to stand trial with us." And on every screen the sterilization countdown began. The countdown did not begin with sirens. It began with numbers, cold and immaculate, descending in the corner of every display on Relay Convoy 9 as if mathematics itself had taken the side of murder. For a few stunned heartbeats, no one moved. Then the bridge fractured into overlapping motion. Wardens shouted targeting confirmations. Captain Etran roared at his own officers to cut thrust and pull the convoy away from the dead system, only to discover helm control had already been locked out by the envoy. On the outer screens, the black escort destroyers around Malrek's vessel began to spread into sterilization geometry, sliding into exact positions with the lifeless elegance of machines built to do one unforgivable thing very well. The dead star at the center of the system seemed unchanged, still dim and ancient and half-forgotten, yet every ship present suddenly orbited it like prey trapped around a buried blade. Leora did not look at the destroyers first. She looked at Mara Vale. The human historian stood within the amber chamber of witnesses as if the collapsing minutes around her belonged to another species entirely. Behind her, the galleries of awakened humanity remained silent, row upon row of faces alive now with attention, grief, patience, and a steadiness so profound it felt like an indictment of everyone still breathing outside the vault. They did not plead. They did not panic. 18,000 years of erasure had refined something in them beyond fear, or perhaps through it. Mara's gaze remained on Leora with unbearable clarity, and when she spoke again her voice carried the weight of a civilization that had long ago accepted loss and then refused surrender anyway. "This is the second method," she said. "The first was extermination. The second is urgency. Compress time. Narrow choices. Force obedience by making reflection feel like betrayal." Her expression did not harden, yet something inside her calm became sharper. "If you survive this age, remember that every empire eventually learns the same trick. Convince the living that there is no time to think, and they will call panic duty." Malrek spun toward Leora's station, fury finally burning through every layer of cultivated restraint. "Mute that transmission," he snapped. But even as the order left his mouth, everyone on the bridge could see it was already impossible. The witness vault had moved beyond the convoy. Golden lattices pulsed across the system, threading ship to ship, station to relay, opening channels no modern architecture had been built to understand, much less suppress. Across secure and civilian bands alike, fragments of testimony began spilling outward. Not all at once. Not enough to satisfy. Just enough to hook thought and make burying it harder than hearing it. On one screen a human physician described triage ships turned into execution barges. On another, a logistics clerk recited shipment manifests proving whole populations had been rerouted into evacuation corridors, designed never to arrive anywhere. On another, a schoolteacher read the names of children categorized as continuity hazards because they could speak 3 species languages before adolescence. There was no theatrical anger in the recordings, no manipulative swelling of grief. That restraint made them devastating. The bridge crew listened despite themselves. Several wardens actually faltered, not because they were persuaded yet, but because for the first time the dead were speaking in a tone more lawful than the living. Tavin's channel surged in Leora's ear, crowded now with noise from 100 places at once. The memory courier was no longer alone. Scholars, dockworkers, outlaw archivists, dismissed teachers, ship clerks, and minor civic technicians were relaying witness fragments through improvised mirrors faster than the ministries could silence them. Entire networks of ordinary beings were doing what state continuity offices had refused to do, preserve raw record before it could be rewritten. Tavin sounded breathless, half terrified and half exultant. "They're comparing it," she said. "By stars, Leora, they're actually comparing it. Old colony loss reports, sealed tax voids, vanished census bands, inheritance gaps. Once people saw one lie clearly, they started seeing the seams in all the others." That was the true contagion, Leora realized. Not human testimony by itself, but pattern recognition. One buried crime made people question every polished certainty they had been handed since birth. Malrek understood it too. He abandoned the bridge command line and opened a direct, secure channel that even the wardens seemed afraid to overhear. His voice dropped low, urgent, stripped of official cadence. "If the educational lattices destabilize," he said to whatever waited on the other end, "we lose continuity across 7 sectors within a cycle. Species claims will reopen. Border doctrine collapses. Tribute chains collapse. Founding legitimacy collapses." He listened, face blanching in increments. "No," he said a moment later, and for the first time real fear entered him. "Not witness release. That cannot be permitted." He looked up from the channel like a man who had just been reminded that he too was disposable. Then the truth of the sterilization plan arrived. The defect came from one of the black escort destroyers. At first it appeared only as a corrupted burst in the system mesh, but Mara's lattice caught it, translated it, and threw it across every bridge display before Malrek could stop it. Firing solution parameters unfolded in cold tactical clarity. The destroyers were not preparing to cauterize only the witness vault. Their synchronized discharge would trigger a resonance collapse in the dead star's magnetic shell, igniting a system-wide storm that would consume everything in local range, including Relay Convoy 9, Malrek's own envoy, and 3 inhabited trade habitats drifting just beyond the exclusion perimeter. Millions would die in silence so the Empire could keep one legal proceeding from entering the historical record. Captain Etran went pale beneath his scales. Even several wardens turned toward Malrek in shocked disbelief. No one had been told the full cost. Solar sterilization had sounded abstract, distant, technical, the kind of phrase bureaucracy uses to disguise atrocity inside procedure. Now its meaning stood naked on every screen. Leora expected denial. Malrek did not bother. "Necessary attrition," he said, too quickly, too harshly, and the bridge recoiled from him as if the words had released a smell. In that instant he lost more than authority. He lost the last illusion that the Concord's violence was disciplined. The state was not protecting civilization from dangerous truth. It was preparing to repeat the original crime in real time, under the gaze of witnesses it had failed to kill the first time. Mara Vale let the silence after that confession deepen until it became unbearable. "Now you understand," she said gently, and that gentleness cut deeper than accusation. "They do not fear our return because we are powerful. They fear it because we remained recognizable while they became this." Across the amber galleries, more preserved humans stirred to fuller awareness. Their eyes moved across the bridge, across Malrek, across the destroyers aligning for fire, and in those countless faces Leora saw no hatred, which somehow made the moment even harder to endure. Hatred would have made them familiar. What she saw instead was judgment shaped by memory and tempered by discipline. Humanity had not spent 18 millennia dreaming of revenge. Humanity had spent 18 millennia preparing evidence. Then the first shots of the internal coup began. Not in the dead system, but across the wider network. Tavin flooded Leora's channel with priority bursts from military forums, freight unions, educational boards, local defense patrols, and even one fractured statement from a provincial fleet command refusing sterilization compliance until public review of the witness data could be completed. It was not organized resistance yet. It was hesitation, fracture, delay. But empires built on perfect continuity could not endure hesitation in their own enforcers. Every minute the destroyers waited increased the chance that obedience elsewhere would start to soften. Malrek saw the same reports and made the only move left to him. He overrode the hesitation of his captains and initiated direct line command from the envoy itself. His hand hovered above the final authorization seal, the one that would force the destroyers to fire regardless of crew resistance. Around him, bridge officers froze. Captain Etran struggled against the wardens. Leora's pulse pounded so hard she could feel it in her vision. On Mara's screen, the ancient civic code at the center of the witness chamber began to blaze brighter. New symbols raced outward across the amber floor, awakening deeper layers of the assembly. Tavin's voice came through in a whisper sharp with terror. Leora, there's another protocol opening. I can't read all of it, but it's not defense. It's release. She stopped for a breath, then said the words that turned the blood in Leora's body to ice. If they destroy the vault, it's going to put something into every public learning grid in the Concord. Mara Vale met Leora's eyes one final time before Malrek's hand came down. If they choose fire, she said, we choose memory. Malrek's hand struck the final authorization seal, and for a terrible instant the entire system seemed to hold its breath. Across the outer screens, the black destroyers locked into firing geometry with mechanical obedience, their hulls bleeding pale corona light as sterilization cores spun toward lethal synchronization. The dead star at the center of the exclusion zone began to respond at once, not because it was alive, but because ancient human calculations had understood exactly how a frightened empire would try to kill what it could not control. Magnetic flares rippled across its dim surface in slow, warning spirals, and the witness lattice surrounding the vault brightened from gold to white. Every ship in the system shook. Consoles screamed. Gravity stuttered for half a heartbeat. Yet inside the amber assembly, Mara Vale did not move. Neither did the thousands behind her. Humanity stood on the edge of a second annihilation with the same impossible composure it had carried through the first. Then the hearing began. It did not open like a speech. It opened like a reckoning finally granted legal form. The witness chamber widened beyond the limits of simple projection and spilled itself through every active screen in range, from convoy displays to provincial education nets to dockside vendor boards in cities light years away. What appeared was not a flood of random memory, but a sequence with moral precision. One human voice at a time. One testimony at a time. One irreducible truth after another. A physician describing how hospitals had been mapped not to save the injured, but to find concentrations of children. A transit magistrate reciting the coded language by which population removals were disguised as quarantine law. A rural teacher recounting the moment she realized students were being reclassified not by age or ability, but by how many species' histories they had been taught to compare. Every witness spoke calmly. That calm turned horror into certainty. Nothing was embellished. Nothing begged. Humanity did not need performance. Truth, delivered without flinching, was devastating enough. And then came the revelation that shattered what remained of the Concord's moral mask. A human systems theorist stepped forward within the assembly, gray-haired, lean, and so visibly exhausted by remembered history that Leora felt grief hit her before his words did. He explained that humanity's greatest offense had not been military expansion, territorial ambition, or technical superiority in the conventional sense. Humanity had built a cross-civilizational verification architecture capable of comparing public records across independent species without central approval. Wars, sanctions, inheritance claims, extinction reports, border conflicts, all of it could be checked against distributed witness chains beyond the reach of a single empire. The implication hit the galaxy like a blow. The great wars of the Old Age had not merely been brutal. Many of them had been manufactured through manipulated records, forged provocations, edited histories, and curated fear. Empires had not only conquered by force. They had governed by controlling what reality could officially be. The bridge of Relay Convoy 9 went deathly still. Several crew members looked not at the human witnesses, but at the ministry insignia on Malrek's coat as if seeing it for the first time. Even the wardens hesitated. Their whole function depended on the belief that continuity was sacred. But if continuity itself had been weaponized, what exactly had they spent their lives defending? The wider system began to fracture under the same pressure. Tavin's voice broke in over Leora's hidden channel, jagged with exhaustion, triumph, and disbelief. She had escaped the first sweep against the memory couriers only because ordinary people had intervened. Not elites. Not hidden allies from high office. Freight loaders had blocked access corridors with cargo haulers. A school network technician had rerouted purge commands into empty maintenance loops. Dockworkers on Selvar Prime had physically cut a ministry seizure team off from an archive tower long enough to mirror the hearings into civic backup grids. The truth had moved beyond outlaws now. It was loose inside the hands of people the Concord had spent ages teaching not to matter. And that was when Malrek's control began to collapse. One of the destroyers on the outer screen drifted 3 degrees off alignment. Then another delayed its core synchronization by 6 critical seconds. Tiny acts, almost invisible, but in sterilization geometry such hesitation was rebellion. Angry. Signals flared between the envoy and the destroyer captains. Demands. Threats. Loyalty codes. On the bridge, Malrek barked override orders until his voice lost all refinement. Yet the more he shouted, the more obvious it became that the obedience beneath him had changed shape. Not broken fully. Not yet. But cracked. Somewhere out there, officers were looking at human testimony and realizing they had been asked to become participants in exactly the kind of crime they had just heard described. The first overt mutiny came from the escort flagship nearest the vault. Its captain appeared on an emergency line without formal greeting, blood running from a cut across her brow, alarms pulsing behind her. She declared that sterilization orders had been challenged under emergency witness review, that her weapons crew had split, and that she would not fire on a legal hearing while continuity legitimacy remained in dispute. Malrek screamed that the captain was voiding her lineage and condemning the Concord to civil fracture. The captain, breathing hard, answered with a steadiness that sounded strangely human. Then let it fracture around the truth. Her signal died in a burst of static and weapons fire. Whether she had been killed, arrested, or simply cut off, no one on the bridge could tell. But the damage was done. For the first time in living memory, a command officer had refused extermination on the grounds that history itself might be lying. Leora felt the system tilting and knew that Malrek felt it too. The Empire was still stronger in ships, law, and habit. But truth had achieved something force could not. It had made obedience morally visible. Mara Vale stepped closer within the assembly and fixed Leora with that same piercing, sorrow-steady gaze. "Now comes the hardest part," she said. "Not hearing us. Hearing yourself." The chamber floor beneath her ignited with branching streams of code, and Leora's console opened files she had never known existed inside her own clearance strata. Continuity audits. Educational revisions. Inheritance suppressions. Minor extinction harmonizations. Small edits, procedural edits, deniable edits, the sort of work mid-level custodians performed by abstraction every cycle without ever being told the human cost at the far end of the line. Leora saw her own authorization traces on some of them. Her stomach clenched. She had not ordered mass death. She had not forged ancient genocide. But she had helped maintain the machinery that made later erasures possible. She had served the system precisely because she believed systems were cleaner than violence. Mara did not spare her. That too felt human. "If truth condemns only the monsters," she said softly, "then everyone else waits for permission to stay innocent. We built this hearing to ask more of the living than outrage." The words cut deeper than accusation. Around Leora, the bridge crew were no longer just listening to humanity. They were measuring themselves against it. Humanity had lost worlds, children, time, language, and nearly existence itself, yet what it had preserved across 18,000 years was not a doctrine of vengeance. It was a standard, a demand that the living become worthy of record. Then Tavin's voice returned, hushed now, reverent and terrified all at once. She had finally translated the deeper release protocol blooming beneath the assembly floor. It was exactly what Mara had implied and somehow worse in scale than anyone had imagined. If the vault were destroyed, it would not merely leak evidence into scattered channels. It would drive an uneditable historical core into every public learning lattice, civic registry, legal archive, and juvenile curriculum spine still operating on Concord foundations. Not enough to answer every question. Enough to make future erasure impossible. Enough to ensure every child in the galaxy would grow up with the first undeniable fracture in the lie. Malrek understood instantly. That was why, despite all the destroyers, all the wardens, all the centuries of Imperial reflex, there was terror in his face now that no discipline could conceal. If he let the hearing stand, the Concord might survive as a weaker thing forced to answer for itself. If he destroyed the vault, he would guarantee the permanent death of controlled history. There was no winning move left, only different shapes of loss. He chose violence anyway. Across the system, the remaining loyal destroyers forced full synchronization. The Dead Star's corona flared blinding white. On Leora's console, the assembly floor reached release threshold. Captain Etran shouted for someone, anyone, to cut power to the envoy. A warden turned his weapon not on the crew, but on another warden. Tavin screamed that mirrors were ready but incomplete. Mara Vale stood amid the awakened dead with the dignity of an entire species refusing to kneel twice. And as fire gathered outside and memory gathered within, Leora realized the final choice had not been built for captains, ministers, or empires. It had been built for the custodian. Her hand moved toward the release seal just as the destroyers fired. Leora touched the release seal at the exact moment the destroyers fired, and for one impossible heartbeat destruction and witness became the same event. The sterilization beams crossed the dead system in converging lances of white, each one bright enough to erase shadow from metal and flesh alike, each one carrying the full, sterilized intention of a civilization that would rather burn worlds than answer a question honestly. Relay Convoy 9 shuddered so violently that half the bridge went dark. Consoles ruptured. One of the outer viewports crazed into a web of fractures. Captain Etran was thrown against the command rail, and 3 wardens disappeared in a storm of sparks as the suppression grid overloaded. Yet none of that was what Leora remembered most. What she remembered was the sensation that came through her hand the instant she completed the human protocol. Not heat. Not pain. Recognition. As if something older and steadier than fear had been waiting all this time for one living custodian to choose record over obedience. The assembly answered. The amber chamber vanished from her private console and became everything. It spread through the ship, through the destroyers, through the envoy, through every surviving relay band and learning. Lattice and public archive spines still linked by Concord infrastructure. Human code did not scream its way into the network. It unfolded with terrible elegance, sliding beneath modern systems through the deeper legal architecture the Empire had forgotten was still supporting its own weight. Every educational grid, every inheritance registry, every civic chronicle, every child access history index lit up at once with the same impossible designation, foundational witness release accepted. Public record lock irreversible. Malrex saw the sentence and made a sound Leora would carry for the rest of her life. It was not the cry of a villain denied victory. It was the sound of a man watching the entire logic of his world die in front of him. Then the witness vault took the sterilization strike. The black structure around the dead star did not evade, retaliate, or beg. It opened wider. Layer after layer of dark geometry folded back around the amber core at its center as though humanity, even now, intended the galaxy to see exactly what it was destroying. The converging beams struck the vault and the void turned white. Shock waves tore across the system. One escort destroyer folded in on itself like paper thrown into a furnace. The envoy lost stabilizers and spun hard to port. Relay Convoy 9's engines failed completely, leaving the ship drifting blind through a storm of charged debris and magnetic fire. On the bridge, bodies hit the deck, lights died, and every voice vanished beneath the roar of collapsing energy. When vision returned, the witness vault was gone. No drifting hull. No surviving core. No triumphant hidden weapon. Only fragments of black architecture vaporizing into luminous dust around the dead star, each shard dissolving as if the structure had given itself completely to the thing it was built to protect. For one crushing second, grief hit Leora so hard she forgot to breathe. Humanity had crossed 18,000 years for this. Not return. Not empire. Not survival in any ordinary sense. One final hearing. One final proof. One final refusal to let the killers own the last version of events. Then the first incoming confirmations began. Tavin's voice came through the hidden channel in a burst of tears, static, and half-laughing disbelief. The release had taken. It had taken everywhere. School networks on worlds that had never heard of humanity were already showing preserved witness fragments in basic civic history modules. Legal registries were auto-flagging sealed extinction files for public review. Inheritance systems were rejecting continuity edits that lacked pre-Concord validation. Children on trade stations were asking their teachers why extinct species were suddenly speaking in first person. The ministries were trying to issue emergency suppressions, but the suppressions no longer held authority over the deeper lock the human assembly had invoked. The truth was no longer loose in the underworld. It was structural now. Permanent. Uneditable. Across the wider system, the effect was immediate and catastrophic in all the right ways. Loyalist ships broke formation not because they were defeated militarily, but because the logic beneath their orders had collapsed. 2 destroyers powered down weapons entirely and shifted to rescue patterns for the nearby habitats they had nearly doomed. Another attempted retreat, only to find its own crew had locked command access pending civilian review. Throughout the network, fleet officers, provincial governors, archive administrators, and ordinary civic clerks were being forced into the same confrontation at once. They could continue serving the old order, but they could no longer pretend it had ever been clean. Malrec tried to speak over the emergency channels, tried to reassert continuity authority, tried to frame the event as a weaponized archival attack. No one listening could fail to hear the desperation now. His words no longer landed inside silence. They landed against a living wall of testimony already embedded in public record. Around the galaxy, people were not merely hearing accusations. They were seeing names, dates, civic seals, procedural chains, evidence so calm and exact that denial felt childish beside it. The Empire had lost its greatest weapon, not firepower, but the privilege of narrating reality first. Captain Etran pulled himself upright through blood and smoke and looked at Leora with an expression she had never seen on any superior officer before. It was not command. It was moral astonishment. Around them, surviving bridge crew were staring at restored displays where children's learning interfaces, civil law boards, and public memory indices all carried the same human witness markers. The dead were teaching the living in real time. Not through conquest. Through standards. Through evidence. Through the most human defiance imaginable. The insistence that what happened would be known. Tavin sent one final data burst before her channel destabilized under traffic overload. Most of it was system-wide confirmation, fragments of worlds waking into the first honest day in ages. But buried at the bottom was a sealed designation the release had exposed without fully opening. Not survivor coordinates. Not hidden fleet routes. Not military contingencies. A single header preserved in human civic code and translated just enough to ignite a new universe of questions. Inheritance protocols. Pending worthiness review. Leora stared at the words through the smoke and failing light of the bridge, and for the first time since the signal had arrived, hope felt larger than shock. Humanity was gone from the vault, but not gone from the future. Somewhere inside the irreversible record now spreading through the galaxy, humanity had left one final test unanswered. Not can they survive. Not can they take revenge. Something far harder. Had the living become worthy of what the dead had saved for them? Beyond the fractured viewport, the dust of the destroyed assembly drifted around the dead star like a new constellation being written by hand. Across the galaxy, empires were starting to crack, classrooms were starting to question, archives were starting to open, and children who had been born into edited history were hearing human voices for the first time. Humanity had not returned in fleets. Humanity had returned as the end of silence itself. And somewhere inside that vast awakening, the future waited for an answer.